Do you ever wonder how that toy you buy for your child gets from point A across the world to point B, your local retail store? Do you ever wonder how a bag of potato chips even ends up on the shelf? Well, that's the supply chain, and it's the intricate and very complex worldwide global supply chain. And we talk about that today. My guest, Kerim Kfuri, is the expert, has a certification from MIT specifically on logistics and supply chain. He owns a software company. He's the CEO of a software company around global logistics, a consultancy business as well. And he's been at this for a long time. He's the guy that helped companies get through COVID and get their products from overseas to here. He is the guy that is working with people as tariffs, no matter where you stand on that topic, as tariffs start to impact the supply chain. And so this is a different type of podcast than we normally do, business, health, and wealth. But you can't have a strong business if it has a physical product, if you don't have your supply chain right. And as you scale, that becomes incredibly important. And you can't build wealth if you don't get the business right. And to get the business right, you have to have the supply chain right. And we talk about that today. It's a short and sweet episode packed with value. You're really going to enjoy this. And as always, if you are a brick and mortar health or wellness business, including fitness businesses, and you're not generating enough leads, but more importantly, you're having a difficult time getting those prospects to show up for their first appointment, their first class, so that you can convert them into a paying customer, a long-term paying customer, check out ThriveMore.ai. ThriveMore.ai. They can help you solve these problems and scale your brick and mortar health, fitness, and wellness business. Enjoy the podcast. On today's episode of the ThriveMore podcast, I get to speak with Kerim Kfuri. Kerim is a global entrepreneur who has spearheaded numerous ventures across a range of industries. He serves as the president and CEO of the Atlas Network, a global supply chain enterprise that delivers comprehensive end-to-end services, including product development, factory selection, production oversight, management, quality control, logistics, shipping, and storage, you name it, anything that has to do with getting a product made to the store shelf. He's also the founder and CEO of the Global Crosswalk. It's a SaaS platform that streamlines project life cycles within the supply chain industry. In addition, he's the founder and co-host of the Supply and Demand Show on YouTube and the best-selling author of Supply Chain Ups and Downs. Kerim, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me, and I apologize for the mouthful.
No, that's fine. In fact, I said Kerim, I meant Kerim. I've got to get that right.
Sorry.
Well, hey, man, let's dive in. We have limited time today, and I want to, when you were booked, it really excited me because we've talked about so many things on this show with business, health, and wealth. But to create a strong business and to build wealth, you got to get your supply chain right, which is one of the things that so many entrepreneurs don't think all the way through because it can be pretty complicated. So just real quickly, how did you get your start to build an expertise and really be one of the best experts in this discipline?
It's like any entrepreneurial venture. It's not always a straight path. I had multiple different corporate experiences and personal experiences that came together to bring me to this place.
Okay.
I think personally, I always was well-traveled, spoke multiple languages as a kid. My parents were immigrants. And so in this way, I started with this multicultural idea and that the world was your oyster and traveling was important and seeing people from different walks of life was an important way to work. And honestly, when it comes to global supply chain, communication and understanding of all sides of the equation is super important. So just that fundamental idea from the very beginning. And then through time, worked in different consulting arenas in the financial space for a while. But it really wasn't until I got more onto the regulatory side of the business, where I worked at the Securities and Exchange Commission in the Office of International Affairs, and then at NASD FINRA on a lot of regulatory matters, specifically around risk mitigation, control matrices, and sort of Sarbanes-Oxley related compliance, that it all came together for me when I took a trip to Asia. I had family and friends that were doing work there in manufacturing. And at the time, more than 20 years ago, a technology platform like Alibaba was really taking a big foothold, but there were a lot of bad actors on that platform. So, you'd consistently hear these nightmare stories of, I went online and I saw some great pictures and I sent some money and I didn't get my products, or when I got them, they were 50% wrong and I couldn't do anything because it's on the other side of the planet. Well, for me, those consulting experiences and multicultural experiences and regulatory experiences all came together to then create essentially what was and what is the Atlas Network now more than 2 decades later, with the basic idea of global supply chain solutions, mass production delivered safely, having a model that is primarily geared around 3 tiers, which is picking the right supplier, having eyes and ears on the ground, and third-party attestation at the heart of a model like this, and just looking out for the interests of small to mid-sized businesses and entrepreneurs who don't have the bandwidth or knowledge or capabilities to do it themselves.
Yeah.
So this is where the Atlas Network, has really played an important role for more than 2 decades, and we continue to grow and thrive in these arenas.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think people, they just, they don't have an interest a lot of times, the average person in supply chain, because they can't appreciate the complexity of it. So for me and the listeners, let's just talk about, I'm making this up. Let's talk about like a bag of potato chips, or let's talk about a toy made in China that ends up, on a Walmart shelf. Just walk us through, and I know there's a zillion different, inputs and outputs there, but walk us through just the complexity of getting that bag of potato chips to the grocery store or that toy onto the Walmart shelf.
Absolutely. Well, let's do the toy just because
Okay,
the
yeah.
bag of potato chips has got agricultural supply
Yeah,
chain, and then it's got, packaging supply chain, which are two
exactly.
different things. But let's start with the toy, for example.
Okay.
Well, to do the toy, you obviously need to have the client who has the interest in the product. They either have the design or the specifications, the technical drawings to manufacture or produce this thing. Or if they don't, you then have to produce those for them, working with engineers and designers, of which we work with hundreds of those. After you're at that stage, you then have to then do an appropriate factory selection process. And to do this is a mixture of quantitative and qualitative factors. So for a big client like Walmart, they have a lot of contractual obligations on what kind of suppliers they can even work with. When you're dealing with smaller to mid-sized businesses, there's less constraints. But on the quantitative side, years in business, level of exports, how many employees, all of these things around the scale and breadth of the organization. Qualitative, as far as the responsiveness, professionalism, accountability, the ongoing or past working relationships. And so you really got to pick the right supplier, because the right supplier gets you, let's say, 75 to 80% of the way there. After you do this, you then have to go through a prototyping and sampling process, which could have some costs and so forth. And when you get these prototypes and samples, you're going to deliver them to the customer or to any places, distribution sites or polling or engineering groups that they work with, to ensure that it does what it's supposed to do. Also, at this time, if it's a specified type of product, like for kids or for, health or like food and beverage, you may have to have third party lab testing to look for things like lead paint, and look for things like standards in accordance with child safety regulations, or the FDA in that case, if it's for food related type of products. So you do the third party testing while the mechanical and polling stuff is being done. And after you get to that place where the testing looks good, the client's happy with the prototyping, you then move to a manufacturing process. But before then, you have to have a solid agreement in place with your manufacturer. You have to have QC checklists in place. You have to have risk assessments in place to understand the areas of challenge. And then you go forward with manufacturing and an agreement, a contract in place that says, you're going to meet these timelines, you're going to meet these quality standards, either by the industry mechanism or by what we've determined to be the qualities and parameters that need to be set in place. This is where eyes and ears on the ground have to come in to kick the tires. We, the Atlas Network, provide that with on-site visits by QC people, engineers, and so forth, to ensure that the productions are going appropriately in the way that they should be. And when that's all done, you then have third-party attestation. You bring in another group that's not associated with us, or the factory itself, or even the client that is paid to find mistakes. When you do this third-party attestation side, you have that, third-party perspective and a level of unbiased QC report that's given at the end that says, here's the clean bill of health on this production. You then have to work through the logistical process, how it's going to be packed up, how it's going to be palletized, how it's going to be transited and shipped, who is going to receive the goods and who's going to be listed as the consignee, which is the owner of the containers as they come through. Customs are paid, goods are picked up, or pallets or containers, and are trucked from a warehouse to a from the port to a warehouse or distribution center or a client site. And then after all of that is done, it is then repeated after the inventory is depleted through the entire mechanism. Again, obviously without the prototyping and development side on the front end. So this is really the entire life cycle of what you have to look at from a product, from the idea into the reality, into the shipment, the customs, the delivery, the distribution, the sales cycle, and then back through again.
And that is a really high level. And
very high level.
And it's dizzying to think of how many things can go wrong in a supply chain. And we wonder why something goes on back order, and we get frustrated and why don't they have this product I want? Because of everything you just said, there's 10,000 things that can go wrong that can prevent it from showing up on that shelf.
Absolutely. And what I talk a lot about in my book, Supply Chain Ups and Downs, and I named it that because of the roller coaster ride that is this industry, is most of those things you really look to talk about or think about are the controllable factors. But the real challenge is also being adaptable and nimble enough to handle the uncontrollable factors. What are those? The pandemics of the world, the natural disasters that occur, the strikes that happen in the ports, things like political environment or wars, any of these things that can completely disrupt the transit of the goods, the costs or tariffs, as we're talking about in this environment and world we're living in, that can make products and businesses become completely unfeasible. So this is also a huge part of supply chain management, which is not on the surface or the face, and you really can't predict, even if you had the crystal ball, on what's going to happen and how to make yourself disruption proof. You have to have backup plans and alternatives and other mechanisms in place to deal with those uncontrollable factors as well.
It is amazing anybody makes a profit because there's just so much that can happen. What would you say is the most maybe misunderstood part of what you just shared by the layperson, by the average person that's got their grocery cart or their shopping cart at a given store, or they're shopping on Amazon? What is the most misunderstood? Maybe, there's so much that they don't even think about, and I don't think about, but what's the most misunderstood part of that whole supply chain process?
Sure. And I talk a lot about this on my social media platforms, Instagram, YouTube, and all that stuff. Every day, actually, I'm discussing the importance of the fact that the interconnectedness of the supply chain to our daily lives, I think, is one of the most misunderstood elements. And it's only in these recent times, pandemic and in the current global environment and so on, that we really start to understand that. When the products, the costs, skyrocket, or they're not on the shelves anymore, or you can't get what you need when you need it, because we're in a convenience culture, right? You push a button, you get on this device over here, and in 5 seconds, the world turns over at our beck and call, until you have disruptions, until you have major breakdowns. So I really think one thing that's very misunderstood is how many touch points there are to our daily lives with supply chain. And that's different kinds of supply chain. That's agricultural supply chain, the food, things that we eat, energy related supply chain concerns, products themselves. There's an ongoing list that each one of these elements has its own facets and complexities around its own supply chain, but it touches our lives every single day. I think the other thing that's misunderstood, especially by business people, small to mid-sized businesses and so forth, that are unseasoned or don't fully understand supply chains, is how long things take. And the fact of, as I mentioned before, the unforeseen disruptions that no one can plan for. And one other thing also in the business realm is that just because you've done a production 100 times over does not mean that you can rest on your laurels and assume that that 101st time will be just as good as the previous 100 times. Every single production must be looked at as the first time, because the environment could be different, the conditions could be different, the materials could be different. I mean, for God's sakes, the person that's running the production line could be a different person, and that person is, having some argument with someone in their family and is not paying attention to what's happening in the line, or, does something else, or isn't really as focused, and that will then trickle down where mass production becomes mass disaster. You got a bunch of widgets that are unusable. So these are all different elements of things that need to be thought about that are misunderstood.
This segment is sponsored by Rockbox Fitness Franchising. Take control of your destiny and join the boutique fitness revolution with Rockbox Fitness. If you're ready to make a real impact in your community and own your own business that empowers people to achieve their best life, then Rockbox is the opportunity you've been looking for. They provide comprehensive support from site selection, upfit, training, and turnkey marketing, so you can open your studio with confidence and a strong recurring revenue member base. Visit rockboxfitness.com and click on franchise opportunities to learn more about this exciting venture in the fast-growing boutique fitness industry. It's time to turn your passion for fitness and for business into a thriving venture. I can only imagine too, when you talked, we said potato chips, and I don't know how much theft there is in potato chips, but you talked about, you got an agricultural supply chain, then you've got a finished product supply chain. But if we go back to something made overseas, let's just use the toy example again, and let's say it's an American, what is that called, American Doll, or whatever those high dollar dolls are.
American Girl doll.
American Girl doll. There we go. Yeah, my kids are too old for that now, but those are. I'm sure there's a great secondary market for the, for packaged. So I came from the pharmaceutical world, and again, the supply chain's crazy, and every single ingredient and even if it's not the active pharmaceutical ingredient, it has to pass potency and purity, and one wrong thing and the whole batch gets thrown out. It's a nutty supply chain, but the margins they're stupid. They're great, so you can afford to make some mistakes and lose a batch once in a while. But let's talk, and because of that, it's a highly guarded, literally armed, guarded supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
So when we go to like an American Girl doll or something that's, I don't know, let's even say like, Louis Vuitton purses, whatever. Where does theft come? I'd almost think that the companies would have to just accept there's going to be a certain amount of loss, pilferage, whatever the term is. And how does that work into the supply chain? And how have you seen supply chain? So two-part question. And how have you seen some of these manufacturers, these brands, kind of, get their arms around it and fence, so to speak, their, and protect their supply chain, because the value of the products are so high on a secondary market?
Yeah, I mean, I think the important part here to understand comes back to that idea of picking the right supplier from the beginning. Suppliers have to maintain, especially good ones, certain levels of ISO standards, certain levels of accreditations and capabilities, and a client list that is, quite significant, so that when you're working with them, that you are being protected, and that they have mechanisms internally to protect your IP against counterfeiting, against theft, and so forth. And in the end, part of that third-party QC process that we talked about is to be able to have groups that come in that ensure that what's on the pallets and what's the piece counts and so forth are correct. And that this is done, in a proper way, all the way until the time that these pallets are put into these containers and they are sealed. The containers are sealed, and that no one unseals or breaks that seal until it is received at the client site ultimately. So there are sort of mechanisms in place, the manifests, the commercial invoices, the packing invoices, the piece counts, the QC oversight of this process. all of these things have to be in place to make sure that the stones are all turned over and that clients in the end get exactly what it is that they need to get. And part of that is the right quantity. Does it happen that you have that you're short a little bit sometimes, or even higher than what the original count is every now and again? But it's usually not within a margin that is considered to be overly detrimental to the product category. But if we're talking about other types of thefts, like again around counterfeiting or IP related things, that is picking the right supplier, having the right contracts in place, and ensuring that you're protecting the intellectual side as well.
Yeah. So I don't want to go too deep on the pandemic, but if you can speak to just what your life was like during that, let's call it 18 months to 2 years before that supply chain finally worked its way out. And it's probably still working its way out, but there were certainly 24 months where there were just ships sitting out in the ocean waiting. What was your life specifically like during that because of your business and your expertise?
It was an unbelievable roller coaster ride where everybody needed everything. And we were working diligently to make that happen. And our greatest challenge was never on the manufacturing side. Our greatest challenge was always on the transit side and was on the domestic side. So let's say for you in the United States, where boats were left in the harbors and, were essentially molding out there in sea conditions for months beyond they should be, where products, when they would finally come into the ports, didn't have workers to offload the containers, didn't have trucks available to take the goods from the ports to the final destinations, which then created a bottleneck all the way back to, the manufacturing side, where it wasn't that they didn't have bandwidth or capabilities. It's just that they couldn't get things on ships from over there because it was stuck in a huge bottleneck between there and here. So we had to take alternate routes. We had to go to less frequented ports. We had to bring things into somewhere that maybe a 2 or 3 day drive away from just, your standard East Coast, West Coast main ports to be able to service the needs of clients. We had to use airplanes, which was extremely expensive for some products, but we had to do that as well. And we had to be very, very creative, extremely creative on how to get goods to businesses and organizations that needed them most. And that was no different than the fact of what happens every day in the world of global supply chain. It's all about problem solving. I kind of joke that every single day, I put on my fireman's, jacket and I'm just ready to put out those fires, whatever they may be. And today it's tariffs. And then it was a pandemic. And next week it'll be something else. And that's sort of the mentality you have to have. Again, the ups and downs of supply chain that I talk about in my book, which is all about how to navigate this. And more importantly, that the only consistency in global supply chain is inconsistency. That's the only consistency. And if you have that understanding and that mentality, then you are ready to operate within this very dynamic, variable environment.
I would imagine that because of the complexity of the supply chain, AI, machine learning has had to have helped in the tracking and the scheduling, the project management of these ginormous supply chains. What is your direct experience with using advanced technology? Specifically, and I know AI is a buzzword for everybody. Everybody's talking, but I can just only think that we've gone from manifest and writing things down and manual counts to barcoding, and it's all fit into a large language model. Like, so where have you personally applied, or you've seen great examples of AI being leveraged in the supply chain?
Sure. So I'll first of all start by saying that AI is very important because it improves visibility and transparency and can reduce human error in the supply chain, which is very helpful in so many different ways. Where I have seen a good amount of AI being used or in proper ways is, I'm involved with Alibaba.com. I'm actually an ambassador of Alibaba.com, and my company, the Atlas Network, is the first US-based verified supplier of Alibaba.com. So I have been seeing some really great innovations with regards to the sourcing and procurement side through their platform. They have just released a new technology called Axio, which is the world's first AI-powered global sourcing engine. And what it does is it scours their database of 500,000 or more top suppliers based on your parameters, skills, and generates for you who's the best suppliers, why they are, so forth. Can even spit out an entire business plan for you in a matter of seconds, so you know how to operate a new company, what pitfalls to look for, and so forth. And this is time that is saved. It would take significant amount of time to try to sort through hundreds or thousands of suppliers to pick who may be the right one, why they may be the right one, and not even have a full understanding on what to look out for areas of challenge or pitfalls. And they do a lot of that there. They also have a lot of other unique technologies in the world of like image searching and mapping. They have a new tool which is called Alibaba Lens, where you can take this little almost like a picture, a photography type of icon, and put it on a product. And when you do it, it will tell you the supplier isn't naked. And you have to bridge the gap immediately. You don't have to look for things, where to go, how. This is really interesting. And then there's a lot with regards to sort of the ideation phase of AI, where it cuts down on the weeks or months working with design firms or engineering firms, where renderings are able to be created with the push of a button, then transmitted to manufacturers quickly to then be able to create it into 3D models and prototypes, and then get to the manufacturing process much quicker. You save yourself months in that mechanism. So these are just a couple of different ways.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by ThriveMore Autopilot. The latest data shows a large amount of small to mid-sized business owners are living paycheck to paycheck, and that is not why you started a business in the first place. We all start businesses to create the freedom in our lives that we want and to give us options. But to do that, you need more leads, and you need to turn those prospects into long-term paying customers. Well, the solution is ThriveMore Autopilot. ThriveMore Autopilot is the turnkey solution to take the stress and the hard work out of new customer acquisition, which is the lifeblood of any small business. ThriveMore Autopilot works on your behalf to generate a waterfall of new leads through various channels, to nurture those leads with proprietary AI solutions that mimic human interaction, to sell memberships and help you increase your monthly recurring revenue. And they even provide you coaching and your team coaching on the most effective sales techniques and give you a community of other like-minded business owners. ThriveMore Autopilot is how you scale your business without stress and the relentless phone calls and texts and reach outs to the prospects to get them to show up for that first appointment or to show up to that call. So learn how ThriveMore Autopilot can help you win big by going to thrivemore.ai. That's thrivemore.ai. ThriveMore Autopilot, the strategic partner for small to mid-sized business owners to help you scale and live the life of your dreams. So knowing how technology has changed, how you've evolved, you have a certification from MIT, you've been in this business for a long time. You've written this great book that talks about the ups and downs of supply chain. If you were to, and help the listeners, help me, if you were to go back in time to the beginning of your career, maybe a few years into your career, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give the younger Kerim?
Well, I would say that this is a business around having the right mentality. And if you can have the right mentality and understand that although the details really matter, because they do, they absolutely do, that the big picture oftentimes matters more or equally as much, then that is how you can really avoid burning out. That is how you will be able to really scale. That is how you'll be able to really be able to provide the best value and service and be able to still be a functioning human being. So it's very important to have that balancing act between being methodical and detail focused, but at the same time, understanding how it plays into the big picture. And through that balancing act is how you'll be more successful faster.
If I'm reading between the lines, a younger Kareem was very structured, and this is how we do things, and it's in that, and maybe lost sight of okay, what are we actually trying to accomplish? We're trying to get that from over there to over here. Is that that's what I'm hearing? Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty
Yeah,
much.
yeah,
And then when you look at it, if you're always in this blinders mode, you miss other things. You miss other issues or opportunities because you have been so singularly focused. So it is important to just have big picture perspective to understand, hey, we're doing this and it makes sense because it's part of a bigger idea. And so on and so forth. But when you're kind of getting going, you're in the weeds all the time, and
sure.
you just want to dot every I and cross every T, which is very critical and important in other ways, super important. But what do you lose of doing that too?
Yeah. Entrepreneurs listening, that is a golden nugget of wisdom right there. That is a man telling you he's been there, done that. And yes, the details are super important, but not at the expense of what are we trying to accomplish? There's the lesson. Hey, your book, just in closing, your book, what should a reader expect to leave? They read that your book, they set it down. What should they expect to have learned from that book?
I mean, they're going to get a good backbone on the realm of global supply chain if they had no understanding previously. They are going to get an idea about some issues that are happening within the industry that they should also be aware of. Concepts like AI, sustainability, nearshoring, our ever-changing environment. And it's written in a very digestible way. And I think that's super important too, because the global supply chain is complicated enough. I mean, it's not remedial, but it's also something that's approachable. And so that's why I wrote it. And I think that, any business individuals or just consumers that want to know more about supply chain, or even students, there are so many students that are getting degrees or majors in supply chain and productions operations management. This would be a very, very helpful tool. Supply chain ups and downs would be a good read for them.
Yeah, it's not a textbook. It's definitely more
150
yeah,
pages.
yeah, larger print and even every yeah. Awesome. And then one last question before I let you go. Most important question. There are people listening that they work for a corporation and they need help. They are trying to become an entrepreneur and scale a product that, is just in a prototype stage now. How would people follow you, connect with you, and then, get a hold of you if need be?
Absolutely. So my main website is KerimKfuri.com. For any global supply chain related issues, it's theatlasnetwork.com. And outside of that, for the book, it's supplychainupsanddowns.com. And for any kind of social media related topics, I'm on Instagram and Facebook and X and YouTube and, all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm on all those platforms, and they can just look me up on Google, Kerim Kfuri, and you'll see a bunch of content. I'm in partnership with Damon John from Shark Tank, so we do a good amount of things together. So you may see me in those environments, and then Alibaba, as I mentioned. So just look me up, and you'll find a bunch about it.
I love it. We'll put all of that in the show notes too. So someone who's driving, listen on Spotify, if they're not on YouTube, then they can, or Apple, podcast, they can just click there. Hey, Kerim, I want to thank you for coming on. I know you had limited time today, but I was so glad to get this interview in because it's a topic that doesn't get the attention it deserves until there's no toilet paper at the grocery store during COVID, that everybody's curious about it, but this is just great information. And, you really just whet the appetite, I think, of so many listeners on, let me learn more, especially if I'm scaling a business that has a physical product. So thank you for coming on today, man. I'm really grateful for you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you again.
My pleasure. For everyone else listening, make sure to share this podcast with colleagues or other business owners that could benefit from this and could benefit from Kerim's message and also his help if necessary. Until next time, set your intentions for the day and strive to thrive. Thank you for tuning in to the ThriveMore podcast. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any of the resources that we mentioned during the podcast. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and the greatest. You can connect with me on any of the socials at Real Roger Martin. And be sure to check out our website, ThriveMoreBrands.com. There you'll find information on the brands we support and information on franchising. Thanks again for tuning in.